Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Cosmic and Rainbow-colored Comic Vault. I am Captain Logan, and with me today is Deadpoolzilla.
Hello, everyone of the emotional spectrum.
Today we are going to take a crack at Star Trek Green Lantern, the Spectrum War, the first, and I can't, at one time I would not have thought that I would ever be saying the first of the Star Trek Green Lantern crossovers. We are already in the middle of, or I guess 2 issues in as of right now, the sequel to this. And right out the gate, I gotta say, this has got to be one of the most fun crossovers I've read in comics.
Yeah, that's the key word here, is fun, because there are some moments in here that make you go, if you're a major Green Lantern fan, is like, how does that work? How does that work? And it's also hilarious that we're now doing an alternate universe of an alternate universe. Yeah,
that's a really good point. But that's one of the things I really like about it. Because it doesn't get bogged down in the mythology and the history, especially the history of wherever these particular properties are at the time. So it basically takes Green Lantern from a particular period, from kind of a just post-Blackest Night period, and the Star Trek Abrams comics kind of just in there somewhere in the middle of the 5-year mission, and makes it its own universe. And I like that even more now that we've continued on with it, and we're just making that its own world that we can play around in. Usually what we tend to do with crossovers is we make them kind of a fun interlude in the middle of stories that conveniently nobody bothers to talk about again. Where you have 2 universes that cross, and then they have an adventure together, and then they run off and go their separate ways. And the whole thing ends up being kind of superfluous. And I've not seen this exactly done before.
Well, I remember they did a few times in the 90s between a lot of Marvel and Image comics. They did tons of sequels of a lot of them, and same with some of the Marvel DC stuff. But this, in recent years, this is the first one that's done that in a while.
Well, that's a good point. But I don't, and I think you probably read a lot more crossovers than I have, but I don't know that I've read anything that, like, goes off so far in its own direction that they can't, like still exist in the previous universes that you knew. Like, we did that with, Batman and Predator. But every time Predator would show up, it kind of just, it didn't feel like an interdimensional thing. It just felt like, and now Predator's back again, and everything Batman has been doing can happen between those comics. This is very much a, like, reboot for these worlds, and goes off on in its own direction.
Yeah. Which is a very good point. Like, again, you're right. No one's been done that, and if they have, it usually gets reset by the end of the story.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I thought that was a really neat direction to go with it. This feels. One of the things that is tough to get right with a crossover is to make it not tonally too much of one thing over the other thing. I think it can be okay sometimes to take, like, a character from something and put it in someone else's world, and so, you know, you could make it, like, basically a Star Trek story with Hal Jordan there, but a lot of the time you'll get a crossover that is kind of purporting to be both simultaneously, and whoever's working on it clearly is more of a fan of one thing over the other thing, or just doesn't really know how to integrate them. This is some of the best that's ever been handled, I think. This is simultaneously an Abrams Star Trek thing and a Green Lantern thing, fit like a glove, I think.
Yeah. And that's kind of the thing that's one of my, like, sacred, like, 10 Commandment rules of crossovers. Don't try to make it, oh, it's Batman and the Ninja Turtles, which kind of what the first Batman TMNT was. It felt more like a Batman story than and I still liked it, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But it did feel more like Batman than TMNT, and there's been other times where it's been, you know, we've had that kind of problem before in list of crossovers. I'm wondering if the Justice League Power Rangers crossover is going to be like that, where it's going to be more Ranger-centric because Zach looks like he's going to be the main focus of the story, but I digress. But you're right, this is like a perfect little balance, even though it does feel like it kind of starts off as a Star Trek thing, but when everyone starts getting rings, then it balances itself out.
Yeah. It, you know, a lot of the time we'll kind of obligatorily be in one universe for a while, and then by about the middle of the story we'll go over to the other one. I like that this is a story that takes place in the Star Trek universe that is all about the Green Lantern mythology. I don't think you could go the other way.
Yeah, like, you couldn't have the Enterprise just show up in the DC universe and not have the other, not the Justice League in here as well, and not just make it a Green Lantern story.
Yeah, exactly. You know, if you took Kirk and you just put him in the DC universe, it'd be really hard to tell a story where at the end I wouldn't go, okay, but like what about that? Like why Kirk in Star Trek versus anybody else from anything else? Partly because we do some maybe obvious but effective parallels with Hal Jordan and Captain Kirk. Both brash captains, and Green Lantern makes a big deal out of the fact that he's a captain. Although, I've not read a lot of Green Lantern, I don't know that he has a tendency to insist that people call him by that.
No, he doesn't.
I thought that was kind of strange. But in doing that parallel, I think that kind of helps to justify this blend.
Yeah. I don't know, for me it felt a little weird that suddenly, out of nowhere, Hal Jordan has a beef with Kirk, even though it's like, oh, you stole Ganthet's body. It's like, no, we did. Just found with all these freaky rings. And here's the other thing I was kind of, weird about with Hal Jordan. I know it's not, the official DC universe, but yeah, he's very okay with the entire universe being destroyed by Necron in this story.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, he didn't have a family his own, but he had a brother, he had a niece and nephew and a sister-in-law, and they're all gone. And nearly 100% of the Corps, outside of 4 other Green Lanterns, are gone. Well, there are no other rings.
And this is a guy who became a supervillain and tried to destroy everything when his city got lost. So you'd think he'd be more emotional about that. I also would have expected maybe a conversation between him and Spock about a similar trauma they've both had.
Yeah, because, he lost his whole planet, and it gets resurrected as, the new Black Lantern homeworld.
Yeah. And so you'd think maybe there would be a conversation about that. I'm glad you brought that up. That was one of my big criticisms, was that the Green Lanterns, all the Lanterns that show up, on the whole, I feel like, are taking the loss of their whole universe really well. To the point where one of them...
The only one who seems to care is Sinestro.
Yeah, that's true. But he's, he's still the opportunist he always is. And isn't that a trap? And again, I've not read a lot of Green Lantern things, but isn't that a trap that a lot of writers tend to fall into with Sinestro, where he's kind of like Lex Luthor in that he's easier to write sometimes than the hero because he immediately seems more layered and complicated. And so, so we do a lot of stuff with him, but our hero is kind of two-dimensional and stalwart, and there's just nothing to him.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing, is that and Jeff Johns wrote this best, is making him an anti-hero later on, but in here, he is written more like a villain, especially in the sequel, apparently, where he's now the head of the Klingon Empire, and now he's got, Khan's there with the Planet Killer.
I haven't read the second issue, so don't give anything else away.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know, sorry.
But knowing the Doomsday Machine is in there is really cool, because Decker shows up briefly in this.
Yeah, for 2 seconds before getting slaughtered by a Gorn.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, by the way, I'm going to give credit to this comic because I love the Gorn.
Yeah.
And we don't get a lot of the Gorn. And we get the Abrams Gorn, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I don't love the design of them, so I think they're basing that on the video game.
Yeah, well, technically that's the only thing we have of them in that universe.
Yeah, so that's what they do. But, it's not like that's canonical or anything. It's not a big deal. It was fun to see them. That's as good a race as anybody to go to for Rage, I suppose.
But here's what I found weird.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Let me just throw this out here. I feel like the Romulan in here, what's the Romulan's name in here again? I forget.
I forget too, and I think he's made up. I don't know that he's anybody I'm familiar with.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But he gets the orange ring.
Well, he'd about have to be this time period. I mean, it's not like we had a lot of named Romulans.
Yeah.
You know, until the movies.
Yeah, good point. But my point being is that the what's his name, Glowcon, the Gorn, the Gorn Prince. He's so angry, and he's like, oh, I want this and want that, and I want to rule the Gorn hegemony. And I'm like, oh, so he wants everything, so he should get an orange ring. Nope, red. And when the Romulan is before the Senate, yelling and shouting, about what Nero did.
Yeah.
And which actually I'm glad they touched on it, of what happened to the Romulan Empire after what Nero did to Vulcan.
Yeah, I liked that a lot too. There's a lot of really cool sequel stuff for that movie in this that I wish we would deal with in actual canonical Abrams stuff. Decius is that guy's name.
Yeah, Decius, there you go. I feel like he should have gotten the red ring, because you see, like, he is just fuming mad that the Romulan Empire is just becoming stagnant and their people are starving, and he's just tired of it. So I feel like they should have switched the rings between the Gorn and Romulan.
Yeah, I mean, there's of course immediately a real quick, easy throwaway explanation for what the Gorn is angry about, for why he's enraged, and they try to make it a family politics thing. But you're right. I feel like at the very least they kind of both could have been contenders for the Red Ring.
Yeah, and technically, if I wrote this, I'd have given Harry. And I know you said Harry Mudd's a lot different in this universe, but he, or should I say she, should have gotten the orange ring.
Yeah, or just bring in a Ferengi.
Yeah, I mean, why not, right?
I mean, that would be the obvious species to go for orange, certainly.
Yeah.
And like, with, if you look at what is canonical, and honestly, it would be really easy to just throw that in here, and I don't think anybody would care. But like, we set up the Ferengi in Enterprise in an episode I absolutely loathe, but it's like, you easily could have had that here, and it would have been a big deal. Especially since with their version of Mudd, apparently we've got Bajorans already around, and people know about them. So they're real close together. That's the same sector.
Yeah. I will say that it was cool to see, like, the Abrams universe of Chang in here from Undiscovered Country. But here's the problem. He is so superfluous, it doesn't even matter.
Well, that's true of all three of them.
Yeah, but why you could have saved Chang for something really cool, but no, you forget about him after he attacks the Enterprise and gets the yellow ring. Then when Sinestro shows up, it's just you don't even care, because Sinestro's here, and he's he makes him his grunt, basically.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it is disappointing because they set him up like he's going to be the big cool Star Trek villain of this book, and maybe there would be a team up with them. I'm torn because I like that. I mean, we turn a lot of things on their heads, or at least go in a different direction than we do with most crossovers with this, and one of them is we don't really feel the need to do the obligatory supervillain team up. I mean, they're working together, but one is subordinate to the other, and that's, I don't know, that makes sense. That's kind of what would happen. But at the same time, it does seem like Chang might be a presence, and that could be a lot of fun. I'm not so concerned with the idea that we could do something else with him later, because, again, the main Star Trek comics can use him if they want to. This is kind of set in its own world, so.
Yeah. How did you feel about the people on the Enterprise who got rings? Do you think, like, those were the perfect choices?
I feel like some of it would have been really easy to mix around, just as you're saying with the villains. Like, there's a line that I thought was really odd that Uhura has, when she's like, my ring is the opposite of fear. And I'm like, no, your ring is love. And somebody else got hope, so that's weird.
Yeah.
I was glad that McCoy got compassion over hope, because I think that makes more sense for him. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know that the personalities with some of those characters, I hate to say, are like distinct enough that I buy, Chekhov getting the ring he gets over, you know, other people on that ship that could have gotten it, and the whole conversation at the end about why Kirk doesn't get a ring doesn't really play.
Yeah. If you ask me, and this could sound really weird, you know who I think should have gotten the blue ring? Scotty.
Why do you say that?
I say Scotty because the guy's always so optimistic. He's very, you know, he's always looking on the brighter side of things. A very hopeful person at his core. Especially this Scotty. Who
sure.
Yeah, I don't know, but that's just me. I feel.
But that's what I'm saying is that like why you know why check off over Scotty or over anybody else? And I really resisted Uhura getting love because she's the girl and the love interest, and that's all we've done with her at all in the Abrams universe. And
that's the other thing about the Star Sapphires originally. Well, again, they kind of changed it later on, but originally what got you to be a Star Sapphire was your love was scorned. You're basically the crazy ex-girlfriend of the galaxy.
Oh wow, interesting. Okay, so it's not supposed to be as endearing as they're playing it here, or did they change it somewhere?
They changed it. John's changed it a little bit because I know Wonder Woman got the ring, the Star Sapphire ring during Blackest Night.
Oh, okay.
So they changed it a little bit when Carol became a major player again as Star Sapphire.
Yeah, so I guess that makes some kind of sense. I mean, let's go a little broader for a minute and just talk about the basic concept of this, because the notion of making this almost a direct sequel to Blackest Night I think is really cool. That you started. I didn't necessarily expect that right away we would take lantern rings and give them to Star Trek characters. I think Johnson does a really good job of kind of milking this idea for all it's worth and just doing a lot of really fun spectacle with this. It's not a great story or anything, but it's a thrill ride, and that's what you would want with something like this. It ends up being a perfect kind of cross because the Abrams movies are so action-driven that you wouldn't want to cross TOS with Green Lantern, but Abrams TOS makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
and that's why he's able to balance to strike that balance with the tone as well as he does. I find Johnson incredibly hit or miss with his Star Trek, and was a little bit trepidatious about it when I saw that his name was on it. I was kind of hoping maybe they went to a Green Lantern guy, and like I said, I haven't read a lot of Green Lantern stuff, and you're pointing out things that I didn't know of stuff that's not working with the Green Lantern stuff, but his sensibilities kind of seem right for it.
I can agree with that. Like you said, it feels like a summer action movie. That's the best way to describe this comic when you really want to shut your brain off, because there are some fun moments, but when you really think about it from whether you be a Green Lantern or Star Trek fan, that's when it really starts to irritate you.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, like I said, I wasn't irritated at all reading this. I mean, I certainly have complaints. There wasn't anything on the Star Trek side really where I was like, oh no, you can't do that, or you're just totally contradicting stuff. But it helps that we're already in a universe that has done a bunch of that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Let me ask you real quick.
Yeah.
How do you feel about White Lantern Spock?
I thought it was kind of the obvious thing to do. It's a fun moment and all, but I don't think it ultimately works. I like it as a payoff to. This is going to sound weird. I like it as a payoff to the fact that we haven't talked at all, nearly the whole book, about how this is an emotional spectrum and Spock is the logical stoic Vulcan, and then when we finally touch on that in any way, it's by having Spock take all the rings and be able to control the emotional spectrum. That's a fun idea in theory. The problem with it story-wise is I don't really understand why they couldn't defeat Necron in the first place then.
Yeah, but
in the other universe, oh, you just needed a half human, half Vulcan. Okay,
Well, hang on. I'm trying to the reason why he wasn't defeated in the last universe was because when he did Blackest Night over again, he killed Kyle Rayner in that universe, in this version.
Right.
Who was the White Lantern. So they didn't have a White Lantern to summon the White Entity to defeat him.
So why couldn't they just get another one? Like, they've got all the rings of the emotional spectrum. Why couldn't they just find someone else that could do that? Did they just not have enough time? Like, they don't talk about it.
Yeah, they don't talk. That is a good point.
But what are the rules? I don't understand what it takes exactly to make a White Lantern. They don't really talk about it.
It's been a while since I've read Blackest Night, but if I remember right...
Well, I'm just saying for the purposes of this story, but yeah.
I thought it was a smart idea to do having Necron do Blackest Night over again, but this time get rid of the one little problem in your plan. And I'm like... And I'm going to quote my friend Sid Part 2 on this, saying that, why don't villains do that more often, where you just get ready for that one error, and when you do the same plan over again, if it's so, like, 99% flawless, just get ready for the 1% that's going to mess you up.
That's a great point. And in doing it in a crossover like this, it doesn't feel so much like retread, because we've got this other element, and because it does read like Green Lantern intruding upon a Star Trek story. So it reads more like Star Trek crossed with Blackest Night. And so, like, the answer to Ian's question, of course, is, well, that would be dull for readers, and we don't want to see the same thing over and over again. And that's the reason Galactus was only supposed to be one story.
I think, all in all, like, the biggest thing with this comic is, like, it's... When you really think about it, it's fun, but I don't want to compare it to a Michael Bay movie, but it's kind of like in that sense where... It's, like I said before, a fun summer flick type comic.
Yeah, it could have been a little smarter, certainly, and there's some stuff that doesn't quite add up. And Johnson has a tendency to wrap up stories way too easily.
Yeah, I feel like this could have earned, like, another 2. Like, you could have done 8 parts out of this to at least throw in some lines, like you said, like Spock and...
Yeah,
having that moment.
That's true. We could have beefed this up a little bit, which is different from padding it out. But I don't know that the issue ultimately for me is so much the length of it as it is just we spent a lot of our panel time establishing some cool fan service villains that ultimately don't amount to anything because we just make it about Necron at the end. Isn't it kind of odd that you have kind of a double beat reveal with the end of 2 issues with Necron bringing Vulcan back from the dead?
Yeah, that was weird.
You know, like, you get to the end of an issue, and I mean, month to month, I was like, that's really super cool. And I was really excited about it, and then I'm reading the whole next issue, waiting for that to play out. And then you get to the end of that. I think it's 4. You get to the end of that issue, and it's just, oh, don't forget, we're still doing this. And yeah. I was like, honestly, all right.
You could have done that.
I'm going to put that in the middle of that issue, just so that it didn't feel like a weird double beat end of an issue reveal.
Honestly, you could have done that whole big reveal in those 2 end issues, and had them put in like one little page, and just kind of shorten it up and add the important scenes. Like, you could have Necron build the planet, then it zooms in onto dead Vulcan, and then he just says, rise, and you see, like, Spock's mom rising out of the ground.
Yeah, I do like the bit about Spock having a tough time bringing himself to kill the corpse, and that somebody else has to come in and do it for him.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of okay.
Yeah, and I thought it was cool that John Stewart was the one who did that, because, obviously, he had the same kind of problem when Kat Matui, his wife, was brought back as a Black Lantern.
I didn't know about that, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because that makes... I figured there was some kind of a character thing that was supposed to connect them. I feel like this as... because this is the thing I always... I kind of am critical of with crossovers, is if it does enough legwork to make this a fun thing to read and easy to understand for one side versus the other. So, like, if you're a Star Trek person but you don't know anything about Green Lantern, can you read this? And vice versa. And I think this one is decent at that.
Yeah.
Or at least as well as I can tell, because, of course, I'm someone that knows something about both of these things, but I know Green Lantern, of course, far less well. And I do have to say that I don't think I would have appreciated it as much if I hadn't read Blackest Night.
Yeah, like, this seems like if you just know about Green Lantern, oh, he's a guy who can just construct rings, and you haven't read, because I feel like as long as you just read Blackest Night, you're good on this. But if you haven't, well, sorry.
Yeah, so okay, there is a prereq then. But the nice thing is, Blackest Night was a huge, giant, insanely popular crossover, and if you're a comics reader and you were reading DC at the time, you probably looked at that. So like if you've read, you know, only a couple or one crossover in the last 10 years, that's likely to be the one you read.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true.
So that's certainly warranted to do a sequel to that in this.
Yeah. But again, and I guess sequel wouldn't probably be the best word, like an alternate take or something to that degree. I don't know what the proper wording for that would be.
Well, it's a non-canonical sequel. I mean, it's definitely a sequel to Blackest Night. There's no bones about that. It's building on all that stuff, and everything that happened up to that point is more or less supposed to be canonical with this. And to some of your criticisms, whenever it's breaking those things, that is problematic. It doesn't matter if this is a world that stands on its own. We're told what the history mythology was before that. It's kind of interesting that this with Green Lantern has, to maybe a lesser degree, some of the same problems that Star Trek 09 has, which is you get up to a certain point and everything should have happened that we're aware of, but we take a lot of creative license because we've decided that we want to reboot, so we're trying to make everybody happy at the same time, and we're not being careful about that stuff.
Yeah. The other, another point is that, and I guess I just didn't realize it up until now, and I haven't been reading Green Lantern since Jeff Johns' run ended, but wasn't Necron destroyed for good by the White Lantern? By the White Lanterns by the end of Blackest Night, as in double dead. So when I think about it, it's like, how is he even back?
Yeah, and they skirt over that real quick, right? Where he's like, well, this time he decided he'd try it this other way. In Blackest Night, did he have the scythe with the lantern on it?
I'm trying to remember.
Because on this read, I was looking at that going, that is really cool. And then I was like, I bet that's in Blackest Night. I just don't remember.
Yeah. But yeah, if I remember right, unless they brought him back later on, Necron was supposed to be gone for good, and with all the resurrections with him.
Yeah. And I mean, we always find ways to bring things, even stuff like that, back from the dead. I'll be real surprised if we never do anything with him again. Well, and of course, now that we've had kind of a reboot since then, you probably could. But this isn't a case of resurrecting them. This is a case of going, because I found myself wondering, okay, so what has he been doing this whole time? Was he just kind of licking his wounds, just kind of sitting around healing himself?
Yeah. Well, the other thing that was kind of weird to me for this crossover was, the explanation they had of Necron following them, even though they said, oh, when Ganthet died, he made sure that Necron could not cross over into this universe. And Spock gave this weird explanation of saying, oh, he's entropy, and entropy is in all galaxies.
Oh,
and I was like,
yeah, so that's weird.
By that extent, wouldn't that mean that Necron could appear in every universe?
Yeah. Yeah, that's basically what he's saying.
If he really wanted to do Blackest Night on a grand scale, couldn't he just appear simultaneously throughout the multiverse?
Yeah, and then my question would be, why is there a personification of that particular thing in every universe that transcends the multiverse, but of nothing else?
Yeah, why isn't there a White Lantern entity in
that just
every
shows
universe?
up? Yeah, why do you need rings to bring about the personification of life
and death?
Yeah, but importantly, Necron, you don't need rings to do that with.
Oh yeah,
because he just shows up here, apparently. Yeah. I thought the limitation of not having the lanterns with them and being stuck in this world was a cool idea that we run with in the sequel.
Yeah, although they give the explanation of, oh, as long as St. Walker's alive, we can charge our rings, and I was like, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works.
Oh, okay. I don't know anything about that.
Well, it only works for, if I remember right, the Blue Lantern rings only charge the Green Lantern rings, and that's only for a good amount of time. It doesn't charge. Again, I'm working off of memory here. It doesn't charge the other emotional spectrum rings. In fact, it weakens the Red Lantern ring.
Okay. Yeah. So Johnson's either not looked at enough of that stuff, or he's being kind of sloppy with it in order to tell a story, which is unfortunately kind of consistent with a lot of his writing.
Yeah, and if the emotional entities are dead, then the rings wouldn't work, period.
Oh, okay, well, that makes, yeah. One thing I found myself...
Yeah, but they didn't mention the emotional entities, so they could appear in the sequel.
Yeah, and if memory serves, because again, I'm only one issue in the sequel, but they're making a big deal out of there maybe being an OA in the Star Trek universe, so they might be working up to an explanation for that.
All right. Okay.
Because the end of that first issue, they're running off to find it. They think that planet exists in the Abrams verse.
Huh. Okay.
So, I mean, you didn't get any sense that this was going to be an ongoing thing, or that we would get sequels to in this. So it's like this would have been a different review if we'd done it a year ago, because because now we know that we might we've got an extension of this, so we know that there might be an explanation for things that didn't seem to quite pan out in this. I wanted to ask you a question. How did you feel about the notion of reverse engineering lantern rings into something that could be worn by Starfleet officers to emit a force field or shoot phasers?
I thought it was a cool idea, but they don't do anything with it. Like, they just... maybe it'll be a bigger thing in the sequel.
Yeah.
It probably is.
It is.
But, like, when you... Again, if we didn't know there was going to be a sequel to this, we'd have thought, yeah, that's a cool idea. Don't do anything with it. But the whole thing with rings and reverse engineering it is, like, you need emotion to power to give those rings life.
Yeah, I wondered about that. And, like, Scotty... I like that Scotty didn't fully understand it, so he wasn't able to do everything the ring can do, but I wondered why there wasn't any discussion from any of the Enterprise crew about how strange this technology is, and maybe even especially questioning whether or not this emotion powering thing seems to make any sense. Like, they ought to have been a little bit more skeptical of that. Because that sounds like a real science fantasy, pseudoscience kind of idea, and there could have been a really, fun discussion about because especially Spock, should be talking about that, and should be like, that goes against everything I understand about how science works. And I mean, he would be open-minded, and obviously there's proof that it works, and so it might have been fun if Johnson had tried to actually break it down in a conversation where Spock or Scotty is having to come to understand why this emotional spectrum thing can, how that actually powers rings, and how this is science and not magic. Because a couple of times the Starfleet crew is saying magic rings, and it's not magic rings, it is technology. And Scotty is even reverse engineering them. And we do this kind of thing in Star Trek a lot, where we come upon something that looks like magic, and we find out that we don't understand as much about how the universe works as we thought we did. And I just wish we talked about that.
Yeah, well, Cap, we needed room for that scene, that pointless scene of Chekhov flying around in his Blue Lantern ring.
Yeah,
I had to make room for that.
Yeah, I was also surprised that
two useless scenes of rebuilding New Vulcan, or excuse me, Black Lantern Vulcan.
Yeah. Well, that didn't waste a lot of panel time, but one of those did not need to be there, certainly. I was surprised that more people on the ship weren't disappointed that they didn't get rings.
Yeah, like...
Sulu's real cool about it. He's like, well, at least I get to use this this manufactured ring that Scotty came up with, I kind of like that moment where he's like, where Scotty's like, I hope it doesn't kill him.
Yeah, and also, why is it that Scotty had this sudden urge to, like, induce, what was it, nuclear energy or some kind of particle energy to the rings?
Yeah, I forget.
Like, he was introducing, like, nuclear power or some kind of, like, dangerous energy to the rings and see, like, oh, I just wanted to see what it would do to them. Really?
Yeah, because Johnson is trying to be true to the reverse in that particular source material, and that's a more reckless Scotty, and everything he does ultimately kind of works out at the end, just like Kirk.
So should we call Abrams Scotty Ludwig von Drake from Disney? Like that Albert Einstein duck?
Sure.
Sorry, like, I'm a Disney nerd, so sometimes I just think of something random, and anyway, I've embarrassed myself. Continue.
No, that's all right. I just didn't right off know what you were talking about. Like I said, I'm glad we're doing more with it. The status quo that we're left with at the end is kind of the most interesting thing about it. So, like continuing on with a Star Trek universe that is invaded by Green Lanterns or by the Lantern Spectrum in the first place is kind of a fun idea.
Yeah. One thing I really hope they do in the sequel, and I'm sorry to cut you off, I just wanted to bring this up. I want to talk I really hope they talk about the ethics of having weapons that can be powered by emotion.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
because that just seems like you're giving a kid a loaded gun every time.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice if we were talking about more stuff in the first place, but again, I'm kind of asking then to be able to have my cake and eat it too, because this thing covers a multitude of sins by being a version of Star Trek that is not as idea driven in the first place. And so it's frustrating because you want it to go to more of those places, and it pays science fiction ideas and like the humanity of it lip service. But if this were a TOS episode, a lot of the action would be in the background, and we would stand around and talk about what's going on for a while, and that would probably be more interesting, but it wouldn't be as fun. And this is certainly paced really well for the story he's trying to tell. So, like, I don't want to give it. I don't want to knock it too much for that, but I think it could still have been. It had stood to be a little bit smarter, even though it is supposed to be action Star Trek.
Yeah. Like you said, I can forgive it for what it is, because maybe I was just hoping for a little more to it of having these two universes, but yeah, like you said, it'd be cake and eat it too kind of moments.
Yeah, maybe my standards are too low, but boy, I was just impressed that we didn't spend half the book talking about how the universes were able to cross over in the first place. That we explain that away very quickly, and it's kind of a creative way to do that. We come up with a pretty cool and for the context of this, logical way to get all of the rings there. It is kind of. We do have a lot of convenient moments of when lanterns show up, and a lot of conveniences in like important moments to set up things in the first place. Like every time somebody gets, or at least the villains, every time a villain gets a ring, they're conveniently explaining their whole motivation for why they then, or their whole character motivation and the reason the ring chooses them just before the ring gets on their finger.
Yeah, that's Villain 101, Cap, don't you know?
Oh, okay, alright. Well, it's nice that, see, villains are all fourth wall breaking. They know that I'm reading and that I need to know those things.
Well, the one thing I don't like is how they wrote Larfleeze of just being like, oh, because initially when Larfleeze lost one of his rings, he would just go completely nuts to try to get it back because everything's his.
Yeah.
So when he got to Romulus and he was like, I like your ideas. And I'm like, no, Larfleeze, you should be trying to rip his arm off to get your ring back.
Oh, okay.
And then he's encouraging all these ideas for Decius, and I was like, that's not Larfleeze at all.
Yeah, so
he's Gollum with a power ring.
So I'm getting the sense that if you're a Green Lantern person, this probably is not as good as if you were just a Star Trek person?
I wouldn't say that. There are some good moments. I mean, Sinestro and Atrocitus are written pretty well.
Yeah, but there's a lot of stuff that's taking you out that wouldn't have taken me out because of my ignorance of Green Lantern history. And I just didn't have as much of that with Star Trek because it's because of the version of Star Trek they're doing.
Yeah, that is true, and I guess that's what
he's able to
writer
he's able to make up a lot of stuff.
Inclined for that universe as well. So, but yeah, I just can't get over some of the like little inks and budges there. But I still like this comic.
One of the things that's kind of ironic is that he's not working with a rebooted Green Lantern universe like he is with Star Trek, but Green Lantern was in a reboot where it was in a bubble.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. Like, this would have been even more the perfect thing to cross over if Green Lantern had been one of the things in 52 that they had started over with and created a lot of new mythology for.
Yeah, but that was in the middle of Jeff Johns' run, and that wasn't going to happen.
No, of course. I just think that that's somewhat ironic.
Yeah. My thing with this comic is that at least it's very much it's hit the ground running from the get-go, and it doesn't take 2 issues to tell the same story over again. Right, Assimilation Squared?
Exactly. I mean, that's like I said, that's where my standards were for this book. Is that like I got to the end of the first issue, and we had gotten more done than and in establishing the fun stuff that you came here to read in the first place than we usually do, even like halfway into a lot of crossovers I've read. Yeah, Assimilation Squared is rough because it spends so much time recapping things for audiences that either are already going to be familiar or not going to care. And this hits the ground running and does not do that. It seems to have learned, if not learned from that, is just smart to not go that way.
Yeah, and maybe it's the 6-issue thing, but I don't know. Like, at the same time, while I would have liked more personal stuff and maybe padded out a bit, but like you said, at the same time, it might have ended up like Assimilation Squared, where just like it's 2 issues of the same story over again.
Yeah, and that's a comic that was kind of 4 issues of story padded to 8 issues. I think this is like, I mean, it's 6 issues of action, and then there are a lot of ideas that would have been nice to explore, but that Johnson is to some degree getting away with not doing just because of the genre, just because of the kind of story he's telling. I also really appreciated that even though I don't even want to say there's a rivalry. You said Kirk and Hal Jordan have kind of a beef at the beginning. I think beef is even too strong of a word. It's not there for any amount of time. I was excited that we had a crossover here where our heroes don't have to obligatorily fight before they come together. We almost always do that.
That's always good. But then again, as the inner fanboy, you always want to see like who would win a fight between Batman and Green Ranger. Right?
Yeah.
It's one of those kind of moments, but at the same time,
I don't, but sure. I mean, I know people come to these things for that, but at the same time, that's a place where I'm glad that this went, that this kind of, aired on the Star Trek side, where it's a superhero comic, but it's not a superhero comic. Like, it's kind of neat that, like in playing with the optimistic future idea with Star Trek, that you have an apocalypse, and the place that the Green Lantern, or that the Lanterns flee to, is the optimistic future of Star Trek. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Somewhere where it was bleak, and now they're like a new promised land. That's a good idea.
Yeah. And I don't know, you might have thought that where the story was going with the 3 villains, with the Gorn and Shang and the Romulan, was that they would have to all figure out how to work together and put their differences aside in order to defeat Necron, and it doesn't go there, and that would have been the Star Trek thing to do. I was a little surprised they didn't do that, and in not doing that, maybe there's other places you could have taken that, but in not going there, again, they end up kind of just dropping those characters, and that ends up being wasted panel time. and it ends up reading like just fan service and not much else.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a very give and take comic for me. And again, I don't hate it, but like the more you think about it, then it irritates me. Like the more I think about it, the more it irritates me.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I certainly was enjoying it while I was reading it, and it's you know, as we're talking about it, I'm like, okay, it's not as good as I thought it was as I was reading it. But as far as these kinds of intercompany crossovers go, I think it's one of the better ones.
Yeah, like for me, like the best crossover DC and IDW have done is the Star Trek TOS Legion of Superheroes crossover.
Yeah, which I didn't bother with because I don't like Legion.
I don't either, but Cap, there's this excellent scene where where Kirk and some of the members of the Legion walk into this room, and it's nothing but time machines, like the DeLorean, the TARDIS.
That's awesome.
Time machine.
Really? That's awesome.
The Sands of Time dagger from Prince of Persia, the Bill and Ted's telephone booth, they're all there.
That's pretty cool. Well, folks, that's going to be it for us today. Deadpoolzilla and I are talking about doing some more crossovers in the future. So I'm gonna make Deadpoolzilla my crossover guy because that's one of his favorite things. So we'll come back at some point. I really want to do the Planet of the Apes Star Trek crossover. And something I've been talking about going back to for a long time is the Batman Predators. And if you have those or you can get your hands on them, I have all the original issues. I've got them that way too. I would love to talk about those with you.
Absolutely, I'd be down for that anytime.
I like all three of those. I think they're really good.
Yeah, the one that I just find okay is 3, but I still don't hate it.
I mean, it's been a while since I read them, but and they read together really well. It's kind of fun to just sit down and binge the three of them.
Yeah. Like I know I told you, like I told you before we did the recording. We really need to get together and do TNG Alien when that's done.
Yes, absolutely. And I was excited to find out about that. I didn't know that, and Deadpoolzilla brought it up, and I was like, oh, cool, awesome. I love that they're doing that. So if folks have requests of crossovers you'd like to see us talk about, feel free to put those in the comments. And in the meantime, I am Captain Logan.
And I am Deadpoolzilla.
And thanks so much for watching. Happy reading.